Hi YouTube, welcome to another edition of Horror Hands, and for this video I'm going to go through 5 actors who I wish would have done more horror films. So we've got 4 actors and 1 actress, all of which did sort of very few horror related movies, and I just think it would have been interesting to see what they would have done within the horror genre. Let's get straight into it. So first actor is Jim Carrey. Now Jim Carrey did play a vampire in the 1985 horror comedy Once Bitten and did a pretty good job. I quite enjoyed that movie. But he gives such kind of manic performances in his movies and can contort his face in the way that he does. And I would just be really interested to see what he could bring in a horror movie, maybe playing a horror character or something like that. I think that would be an interesting thing to watch. And funnily enough, I really kind of thought about him being in a horror film when I saw him in the Sonic the Hedgehog movies, because he plays Robotnik, the villain, and he's doing a load of villainous stuff throughout the movie, and for most of it he plays it quite over the top. But there's a few moments in those Sonic movies where he plays it with a reserved element of sinister. And I remember watching him thinking, like, dude, if you did that in a horror film, I would legit be scared of you. Really interesting performance from him in that one. So yeah, if I'm seeing him doing that in more of a kid's film, I'd love to see him bring that sinister element to a straight horror film. That would be really good. So maybe he'll get a late career resurgence and do a few horror movies, you never know. But first actor on this list is Jim Carrey. Next actor on this list is John Candy. One of my favourite actors. Now, he did do a very obscure horror film from 1976 called The Clown Murders. Not many people have seen that one, but other than that, John Candy really didn't do that much horror stuff. I actually don't know how this would have worked, because he comes across as such a jolly fellow and such a nice guy and just exudes that really kind of playful, positive vibe. So I really don't know how he would have slotted into a horror film, but I would have really loved to have seen it. I definitely would have watched it, that's for sure. Maybe he could have done more horror comedies. I've always thought he would have slotted into Ghostbusters really well. Whenever I watch Ghostbusters, I always think, I love the movie, but the only thing that's missing is John Candy. He would have really brought a lot to that movie. So yeah, I can't really think how it would work, whether he'd just play it straight and do something completely different to what he usually does. That would have been really interesting to see. But yeah, I certainly would have watched a horror film with John Candy in it. He does give a bit of a maniacal performance in Uncle Buck, the bit with the drill, but I'm not sure if he could have carried a full horror film, but it certainly would have made for a fun watch. Next up we have Bette Davis. Now, Bette Davis did flirt with the horror genre a little bit in 1962's Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, the psychological horror film where she terrorises Joan Crawford, and she's pretty creepy in that movie. I'll give her a do. She's really makes you feel uncomfortable. And Bette Davis, you know, was quite a notorious diva in real life, had a bit of a sinister side to her character, so people say, and she was, one of the reasons she was famous was those eyes. She had those dark eyes, very beautiful woman. But I always thought there was a bit of a sinisterness behind those eyes, and I would have definitely liked to have seen that utilised within a horror film. Now, I don't think kind of B movies and monster movies would have suited her at all, but I think she would have been really good in a giallo style horror film. So could you imagine if like Bette Davis was in a Dario Argento movie? That would have been something special. I really would have liked to have seen that. And I think she certainly could have brought something to the more stylish Italian giallo slashers. I think a bit of a missed opportunity there. Whether she'd ever gone for it is another discussion. But yeah, I certainly would have seen Bette Davis pop up in a couple of giallos. Next up we have Frankie Howard. Now, known almost entirely for his very campy comedy movies, things like Up Pompeii and the Carry On movies, you know, and he was characterised very distinctly by that kind of ooh, I can't do it, but that kind of silly British humour. But he does give a bit of a teaser of sort of horror-related performance in the horror comedy House on Nightmare Park, where he rocks up to this big creepy house and there's some weird goings on. And for some of that movie, a kind of straight, restrained British horror performance comes out in him, and it's really quite captivating. Now, throughout the film, he does hark back to his silly, over-the-top campiness, which works because it is a horror comedy. But yeah, there's just glimpses of him playing it straight as like one of the other kind of thespian actors from that period would have done. And yeah, the guy's got some good acting skills. Ray Milland is in that movie. He does play it straight, and Frankie Howard bounces off him quite well. But whilst I was watching House on Nightmare Park, and it's a great movie, I just really kept thinking, like, I really wish Frankie Howard would have done one serious horror film. That would have been really good. And I could, like, totally see him turning up in an Amicus anthology or something like that. So, yeah, I know he was great in the comedy world, but I really do think Frankie Howard could have brought something to a Hammer or Amicus movie from the 70s. And lastly, we have John Wayne. Nothing too deep with this one. I just would have really liked to have seen how John Wayne's rough, tough persona would have dealt with a horror movie situation. I think that would have been a really cool thing to see. So I think perhaps towards the end of his career, kind of late 60s, 70s, when he's a bit more kind of gristled and sort of this toughened old actor, it'd been really cool to see him thrown into a couple of horror films and just see his no-nonsense John Wayne character deal with like some monster or creature or something like that. That would have been really awesome. So yeah, I would love to have seen John Wayne do like a full-on 70s horror movie, monster movie or something like that. That would have been cool. So there we go, guys. That's 5 actors who I would love to have seen do more horror movies. Let me know what you think about that, guys. And let me know if there's any actors out there that you wish would do more horror films. I'd love to hear who they are. So thank you very much for watching, and stay tuned for more videos.